How's everybody doing? Right? Everybody's gonna be tired from walking at the end of the week, right? All right, so I had a couple questions before we get started, and it's really just to kind of gauge who I'm talking to, so I don't go in a direction that's a waste of your time, okay? So first off, how many public safety divers are in this room? Awesome. All right, how many dive shop owners, affiliates, instructors, people that are associated in some way with the dive shop are here? Awesome. All right. All you guys that are public safety divers, are all you guys actively attached to a team right now? Cool. Cool, cool, cool. All right, so that's a really good turnout in here. All right, so the thing we're going to talk about today is starting training public safety divers, okay? So bear with me on the front end of this. As we move through this discussion, we're going to go from talking about the independent instructor or the instructor who is trying to figure out what to do, all the way to a business, a dive shop, etc. Okay? So it is going to start a little different from the norm. So some of the things we're going to talk about. Becoming a diver, right? Becoming a public safety diver. And then that third one right there is critical. Is there a professional need? Okay? So all of you guys in this room at some time in your life have spent some money on scuba diving, right? Right? Over the years, it's changed. You've re-spent money on some of the same subject matter, I imagine. You've rebought some of the same equipment. You've had to fix equipment that had to be replaced, et cetera, right? So, one thing about public safety diving is you need to find out if there's an actual need and if you can actually serve a purpose in a territory. That's not an insult to any of you. That's not an insult to any of your abilities. But if all you guys are in some way attached to dive teams, then at some point in your time with those teams, you have also looked at how dive teams spend money. Which means that you've seen some of the arguments, you've seen some of the price wars, the bidding issues, things like that. Now, as professionals, it's your job to get involved in that and make it work, both for the team and then for yourself as someone trying to make a dollar in a business where you got to feed family, kids, etc., right? But if there's one team, there's 37 instructors in the area trying to teach that team something, then you have to have either better value or you're wasting your time because someone will undercut you. Does that make sense? So anyway, what do you offer a team? That's the real question that we're going to try to answer. Staying current and being prepared. You guys as public safety divers, I'm sure, are aware that if you don't go play in black water every so often and try keeping lines tight, doing search patterns, working with tenders, you get a little rusty. The guys you work with get a little off on their communication skills. Line pulls slip your mind a little bit. How to fix things on the fly in the field get a little tougher when you're standing there. Try to remember how to put things together, right? But it's all good. That's the thing. That's part of this, staying up to date. So extras and mutual aid we will talk about when we get to the dive shop stuff. And then we're also going to talk to the downside about public safety diving in general and you as an instructor. All right? So, becoming a diver. The first thing that's really essential, and if you guys are attached to dive teams, have played with dive teams, have done things with dive teams over the years, very rarely does a dive team accept a new member who is not already a diver. Every once in a while you will find a team that will bring people on board and they will train them up from nothing to where they want them to be, but it's not a commonality. A lot of times, especially with volunteer teams, the way the SOG or the SOP reads is first aid CPR certified, you got to be an open water diver, and then we'll go from there. So, becoming a diver. I was at an instructor trainer workshop a long time ago where an individual in that workshop was overseeing some younger people learning to teach that program. And when we all went to go do pool skills, the comment was made that, man, in this class we have public safety divers, we have tech divers, and we have rec divers. All these people have been teaching for quite a while now, and their skill sets are very different. So if you have the guy hugging the bottom, and if you have the girl over here who is perfectly trimmed out, you're going to see that difference. It's okay. Remember, their backgrounds are different. Let's go from there. Do you guys in here feel that's an excuse for common skill sets? Background differences. Anybody? So here's the thing. Right now in the industry, everybody at some point has seen some social media, I imagine, where they want to talk about everyone has to be perfectly trimmed out, the baddest, most awesome diver in the world, etc., right? The reality on that is we want to create good divers, right? We do want to make them learn how to accomplish the skill sets properly, be safe in the water, take care of themselves and potentially their buddy, etc. Once we go to the public safety community, things get a lot more critical, right? We're potentially diving in black water, or stressful situations, redundant gear, hotter gear, colder gear. You never know. Things can get rough on you when you're trying to go through those programs. But the first objective for you as an instructor or for your guys as divers is to become a decent diver. Focus on proficiency, try new environments, try new places to go get wet, then focus on becoming a public safety diver, right? So, go ahead and pull all this up real quick. How many of you all have more than one dive team in the area where you live or work or associated with dive teams? That's also very common. How many of you all deal with, there's a fire department team, a law enforcement team, potentially a rescue team, maybe a federal or state team floating around over here, and they all are trying to work together and step on each other's toes at the same time? You know, it's interesting. It's fun to watch. It's fun to make them try and manage each other. But that is something, if you have not gotten into the public safety realm of education, you're going to see. You're also going to see the trash talking that takes place between types of agencies and types of divers. It's okay. It happens in the recreational world too. We all know that. But, again, your objective, if you're going to join a team to be able to teach public safety diving, is to now figure out what's out there and what applies to you. So, where you at, Daryl? So Daryl back there. Daryl's been a firefighter for way too long, right? Obviously, Daryl is going to be drawn towards a fire department type dive team, and he is a captain of a fire department dive team. But at the same time, you may have a background in law enforcement. You may have a background strictly in recreational scuba diving. Cool. At that point, you're going to see what's out there. You're going to work to figure out what makes the most sense for you. You're going to figure out what their prerequisites are. Prerequisites for dive teams typically are in SOGs or SOPs. If you guys don't know the difference really quickly, an SOP is a procedure. A G is a guideline, right? Guidelines have bigger loopholes. They're easier not to hold you to a strict methodology when something weird takes place. They are more common in public safety, whereas with something like the military, SOPs are more common. Anyway, once you see what's out there, you've kind of found that team that makes sense to you, you're going to get in touch with them. You're going to go talk to them, see what the rules, the regulations, the requirements are, join that team, and then from there, you're going to begin the process of joining, learning, whatever their methodology is. All right, so the most critical thing, real quickly, another side question. How many of you guys who are attached to teams are not only public safety divers, but already public safety instructors? Cool, okay. So that being said, the most common way to teach something is to do it first. So you guys that teach recreational scuba diving, if your student only sits in the classroom and you never put a piece of gear in their hand, and or they take the online course from whatever agency, you never put a piece of gear in their hand, and you take them to the pool, you dump all their gear in front of them, are they going to be able to assemble it very well? Probably not. If I show them how to do it, they do it, they screw up, they redo it, they're probably going to have an okay idea of how do we put this gear together, right? So, same thing applies here. To teach public safety divers, you should become one. You need to go fight dragons underwater in black water. You need to go put your hands on things. You need to think about that snapping turtle that you know is right in front of your hand every time you go out there and you're searching, right? Once you've put that in your head, you've dealt with it, you've coped with it, and you've moved forward, then you know how to better connect with your divers. You know how to deal with the issues. You know how to be standing on that bank and you're listening to that comm unit and you hear that guy breathing so hard that you know he's burning through his gas, he's having a bad time. You know to tell him to stop, settle down, relax. When you're working with that new tender and they don't know to listen for that, you've been there, you've done that, you know to talk to him. You know to have your tender start talking, get his mouth moving, make sure his diver feels good on the other end of that line, right? So anyway, one of the smartest things you can ever do is take some time to learn. So I don't necessarily mean, are you going to go to Peter over there, who might be in IT teaching a different program? What I do mean is the origins of public safety diving. Back in the day, you had older people, right? Members of dive teams. Typically, they were a diver of some kind. You had a vehicle go off a bridge. You had somebody fall off a boat. They were the one who put on the gear. They dove down. They looked for the guy, found him, brought him up. Normal standards didn't apply. It was a new thing. It was, hey, we have a guy who can accomplish this goal. That guy may not be ex-agency pro, but he's been there and he's done that. He's done it a lot of different ways over a lot of years. So there's still a lot to learn there. There's a lot of education that you can glean from that person once you join a team, right? So essentially, the next big step is you're going to learn how a team operates. You're going to learn how it functions on scene. You're going to see breakdowns when you arrive somewhere and how they unload that truck or trailer. You're going to see how they gear up, right? You know, what is the process for sitting your diver down, working them through getting on gear? You know, there's a big shift from recreational scuba, right? You're going to figure all that out. You're going to start to see how teams work together. So another big question. How many of you all that work with dive teams also know of that other dive team across town who is full of a bunch of jerks you're never going to work with? That is a very common thing, right? And it usually dates back well before anyone's time on the teams to two chiefs or captains or something that got into an argument of some silly type, and it never got fixed. And so now everybody just hates each other. But you're going to get to see that, and that's critical. It's absolutely critical that you as a dive pro witness that taking place. And we'll get to that in a minute. But ultimately, that's why not everything is written in a manual. Because you're going to figure out things really quickly as a pro. To be really honest, it'll help you not only make money, but it'll help you make safer divers, right? Because let's be really honest up front here. You have to make $1 to be able to continue working with divers. Does that make sense to everybody? Feeling good about things, it's a great way to look at it, but the reality is you still have to be profitable to share your knowledge and move forward. Most teams understand that when it gets down to the nitty-gritty. So, oops, there we go. So why be a diver first? And this is super quick. You've got to understand what you teach. That old guy on the team that you went to and he's been doing it for 30 years, he knows all those tips and tricks that now you're going to take back, put it in your bag of goodies and pull it out and show it off, right? And that's not a negative. They have more experience than you do. There's a past to learn from, and you're going to find people on different teams. When I say old guy too, that's also not an insult. It also means that they're wiser, we'll put it that way. So anyway, the whole goal is you have to respect what you're teaching. So you have to go do it, you got to strap it on, you got to go dive, right? So is there a professional need? So we hit on this briefly. Does the region support a dive team and why? So what that typically means is, are there bodies of water in an area? Does it make sense that a team be functional there? And by that I mean, do we have nothing but a golf course with a few water traps? Or do we have major rivers, lakes, streams, ponds, etc.? What types of education are needed? So for instance, do we have a major river that's running through our territory? So that might incorporate swift water, right? You know, are we in a flood zone? Might need helo training, right? You know, you have to look at the environment where you're going to operate and begin to formulate a plan for, hey, the people in this area might be faced with these problems. The dive team in this area might be greatly benefited by figuring out how we train them to take care of this potential problem. Now, I got into an argument with an instructor 3 or 4 years ago about a type of training. That type of training happened to be working in the courtroom and understanding how to testify. The reason this argument took place was because this instructor I was talking to it had been years since anybody with one of his teams had ever gone to court, and in his 25-year teaching career, it only happened once in total. Well, my response was, how'd he do? Right? The reality is we don't train for what we know will happen. We train for the possibility of what could happen so that when everything hits the fan and it goes wrong, we're able to come out of it safely. That's why I'm a very strong proponent of preparing for the worst and then training your guys and girls for the worst. So if there's a will, there's a way. If you see, hey man, we could teach this crazy off the wall class, and it may not, we're not talking about, fish identification, but hey, we have a river, maybe we do swift water. Hey, we are in a major flood zone, we do helicasting. We do an LZ course so that we could work for pulling out a patient or a victim, because local hospitals do have helos. Why not? So anyway, can you support a team? So do you have the background to teach things? Are you comfortable teaching it? Do you feel like the education that you can provide to a student is something that when everything goes south, when somebody's life is on the line and they will die if that team doesn't have a quality ability to take care of them, do you feel like that education that you're going to give a team, if they do it right and they listen to you, there's a good chance they could really help somebody? That's the critical part. We're not teaching a fly-by-night course. We're not doing something where you read the manual the night before, cross your fingers, and hope nobody knows. Right? So, funding. Really quickly, and we'll hit on it more in a minute. Funding public safety dive teams is the most complicated thing that's ever been. I'll tell you a good example. So back home in my state of North Carolina, we had a public safety diver pass away in the last few months, right? A lot of you probably saw it in the news. It's a terrible, tragic thing. I wish very much that it didn't happen. I was able to get quite a bit of personal insight because we were involved in that investigation. I took everything to the state of North Carolina. So the Department of Emergency Management, the state SBI, North Carolina Highway Patrol, OEMS, we've talked to everybody. We've put them together at the same table. We presented the idea that there needs to be a change with training in the state of North Carolina and requirements. So what do I mean there? So if you become a firefighter, so how many people in this room are firefighters? All right, cool. It's a good example then. When you become a firefighter, do you get to just show up at the fire station and be like, hey, I'm in. Sweet, let's go. The reality is you have to do training, right? Typically, there's block training that's been pre-set aside by your state. And it's, hey, we have to complete A, B, C, and D to be able to do this type of work or be on this type of team. We have to do D, E, F, etc., and it goes on. Then you have Con Ed every year, etc. Public safety diving, at least back home where I live, there's no standard like that. 10 guys can get together one day, get enough dive gear together, get the state to approve them to sit in a building all night, and get some radios, and now they're a public safety dive team. That's how it works. So, funding. That does not always mean funding is readily available. A lot of times you'll see volunteer teams that are developed because a department, whatever it is, will get a little bit more funding from the state because they're willing to take on an attachment and house them in their facility. You have to do the backstory on that, figure it out, figure out where their money comes from, and understand that it's a relationship. That big sale tomorrow does not equal 10 years of working together, teaching, making money, and being a symbiotic pair. Does that make sense? That's a critical thing. So, how can you best help? That's where, let's say you already have teams in your areas and you're trying to figure out what to do. My past experience is the smartest thing you can do is find one, your lead diver. That does not mean it's the captain or the chief or the whatever. It means, hey, who's your guy who really runs the dive team? Get him and his boss. Get them privately. Somewhere where you can really sit down, you can cuss, cut up, talk some trash. You can have a beer if you need to. You can take them out to eat, whatever. It is not a BS conversation. You're going to sit down and say, hey, where do you stand? What do you want? What do you wish you had? Right? Then you're going to work with them to come up with a plan on how you can teach that. So the business owners in here, or people working with businesses, if you don't teach swift water, do you say no? Maybe. But the reality is if you turn around and you go out and you find that Swiftwater Pro, have him put on that dive shop shirt and come out and teach a course for you, he makes some money, shop makes some money. The real deal is at that point, you just took care of your customer, just like you do on the recreational side. That dive team, they are your customer. You have to figure out how to get them what they need and become their go-to, their one-stop for gear, equipment, training, whatever. So really quickly, how many people in here, all your public safety training in your states, how many locations here do the community colleges take care of all that training for your state? I know yours does. Anybody else, or is it all privately paid for? That is awesome. Okay, so to give you guys an example, in the state of North Carolina, almost everything is paid for by the community college system. Money is pooled. Myself or Daryl over there or somebody like that would then go to the community college. We would offer a course, or a team would request a course. We come in and teach it. So we'll use fake numbers here. So let's say a public safety course X is going to equal $600. By standard, the average is about $100 a head that the community college is going to pay for that class. The problem with that is if I don't teach it or Daryl doesn't teach it, somebody else will. And that somebody else is going to teach the $100 course. So there's a lot of ethics involved where we are. The fact that you guys have the ability to have real funded programs means all you have to do is add better value. Absolutely, and we'll get into that. But anyway. Non-public safety pros. Okay, so if you are not a public safety instructor and you're trying to work with a dive team, there are a few things that you can offer. Core training, so that open water, advanced, rescue, anything like that. Even dive master programs, right? Supervisory stuff, professional level skill work, etc. Specialty training, things like search and recovery, night diving, stuff like that does apply. It may not get a team ready for a mission, but it absolutely does apply because one, it's time in the water, and it does relate back to the ultimate mission, right? So, skills work. It's also a resource for new members. So, guy on the dive team joins, he loves diving, he wants to get wet, he wants to get his experience up. A non-public safety diver or dive instructor absolutely can be an available resource, and it's also a profit point for you guys. So it's also a resource to talk about experience, backgrounds, places I've been, whatever, right? It is something to share. Public safety pros. So the first thing is the core. So obviously we're standing here in an ERDI presentation, so we're going to focus on ERDI. But ERD1, tender, ERD2, and dive supervisor. That's the essential core for ERDI's program. Well, all ERDI full instructors can teach those courses. They now instantly become available to be taught to any team, any group, any way that it works out so that it's above board. Public safety pros for ERDI have experience on dive teams. They do have a back history, they do have knowledge, they do have information that they can share. Quite often, you have backgrounds with multiple affiliations. So I'm going to use Paul. How many of you guys know Paul from international training? Paul has a history as a police officer. After that, he's a firefighter. He's a public safety diver. And then after that, he jet sets around the world with international sales, right? He's a great guy. But Paul has a cool history, right? He's been a cop. He's been a firefighter. He's got a lot of experience where he can come at something from different angles and speak knowledgeably with somebody from a different department who's trying to get what they're saying to come across properly. That is something that most of the time a public safety pro has, because in some way they've been affiliated somewhere. Even if it's just with a dive team, that dive team was attached to something. A fire department, law enforcement, something. You had to get there. Professional connections. A lot of times public safety pros, so for instance, I'll use me for an example. So I have one team across town. Daryl over there has another. When Daryl gets a weird call and knows he's going to need some weird piece of gear or extra divers, he knows he can call me. We can chat. It's all offline. We have people available to help him out at any moment. Same thing with me. I know I can call Daryl, and he can hook me up anytime we need something that's offline. We're not having to start time and numbers. We're not having to call another department and send letters. But it's a resource that can now be shared. You become more valuable to who you're selling product to. So this one I put up here because this is critical to me. Leading by example. So how many people in this room have taken a swim test in the last year? Cool. So one thing that's really important to me, and this is a new thing with international training, as of next year, not 2017, but as of the beginning of 2018, physicals are going to be required for all dive pros, and that means you're going to have that signature on that back page, right? On the public safety side of the house, that is absolutely essential. Because a lot of times, especially, so I have a background in the military, I have a background in public safety and public safety diving, but if you lead from the front, your guys will always follow you, right? So my business partner and I, a lot of times, will take turns being the one who takes a swim test before the people we're asking to do a swim test. If you guys follow international training social media at all, you guys will see that Brian and some of the others, they get out and do the swim test at ITWs. That's really cool, right? That's important to me. Knowledge. So let's say that tomorrow something happens and ERDI changes the standard for ERD1. You get the email, but you didn't really look at it. You know, I'll check it out later, whatever. I've got to go teach my ERD1 class. You can't do that. You've got to stay up on things. You've got to be prepared. You know, and you've got to build that experience level as you teach. I put this up here because this is a key slide for me. I see too often when things slip and training falters, because you might have taught the best class in the world 6 years ago. You got at it for 5, you got re-upped. Class might not be as good. You got to build it back up. You've got to give that value. So shops. Dive shops. So the first thing with dive shops are agency affiliations. And so why is that critical? So I have now gone out there, I've joined a team, I've found a team. I'm trying to figure out how to make them money and help them grow, right? But remember I said that I don't teach, say, Swiftwater, right, or helicasting. Well, I can now go to the internet and hope and pray and see what I can find. And maybe I find something. Maybe I call, I don't get the right deal for me, trying to also make money to teach. But the other thing I could always do is call headquarters. I can call international training anytime, and I can say, hey, I have this team that needs this course that I don't teach. And I know if I send Stephanie back there my paperwork, she's not gonna give me the class for free. So at that point, the cool thing is headquarters will now say, well, we've got this guy out in X state or near you. We're going to send you his contact. We're going to do a little email introduction. Give him a call. This is pretty much what they do. We'll try and hook the two businesses up. That's when now you just create an agreement between you and someone else to build your business, expand what you can do, but it's all under your flag. That is really, really critical, because now your customer doesn't know the difference and you took care of him. So service support and equipment support, you guys get that. If you got a dive shop and you service gear, it's a need a dive team has. It also may mean that you can teach people how to service gear. How many of you guys that work with dive teams know that the dive teams you work with have the ability to service cylinders and or regs? Cool. It is becoming more and more common. A lot of the manufacturers have their loopholes built in for public safety teams to be able to do that kind of thing. My experience with public safety teams is the one thing you have to be careful with is making sure that they do understand that sometimes they need unique tools, right? And I don't mean you have to go out and you have to buy the X kit for every type of reg, but I do mean you need to be able to check IPs and things like that. So anyway, again, you guys as dive shop personnel, find the thing that people are willing to afford, and now it's a resource. So if they need that IP gauge, even if it's an inline or something like that, you can now make sure the team has it, can get their hands on it if they need it. So professional resources, connections, and knowledge. Same thing. Dive shops build together over time. Dive shops will learn who's got experience down the road doing this. Public safety pros often know who else is floating around in their region that's teaching. A lot of times you compete against each other. Sometimes you play well together. But it does basically make you a resource to now be able to communicate back to different organizations and or dive teams and kind of share that knowledge and help people better understand what's going on in your region. So the full package, that's what you can become. If you have the ability to help a dive team with getting new gear, servicing, cleaning, taking care of their gear, that includes stuff like dry suit seals that get messed up on an operation or whatever. If you can teach them, if you become a knowledge resource, and potentially a mutual aid builder for them, you are the full package. You basically run their team, they just don't know it. How many of you guys that are associated with businesses have done work where a dive team called because they were out of their element and they needed help, so you went out to support their team? That is also becoming more and more common. I actually do that a lot, but it's because we make ourselves available to do that. With the advent of unmanned systems now too, that is becoming much more prevalent because not every team can afford a $100,000 toy. But when a group in town can, you become an instant contractor to help everybody out, and that's time where you do not have divers in the water. So, dive shops also always have the ability to add. So we already hit on that. So if Scott here becomes a public safety pro and he comes in and he helps, Peter's shop, right? Sweet. But Scott doesn't teach confined space. So at that point, Ben over here does. So now Peter gets in touch with Ben. We just added Ben onto our training team. He might not live there, but on a cycle, maybe he comes in once, twice, 2, 3 times a year and can help run programs that are needed. Well, he just became one of Peter's pros, right? He's a resource available to teams in the area. So anyway, training tools. How many of you guys that are public safety dive instructors have a whole bunch of gear laying around somewhere that you don't use in anything but public safety programs when you teach them? Yeah, we have a lot. So like for instance, we had a whole bunch of dummy firearms show up at our shop like the day that I left to come here. And my business partner was playing with them, running around the shop, playing, like cowboys and Indians kind of thing. Just being an idiot. Well, of course we had a bunch of customers come into the store when he's kneeling behind a cabinet with a pistol over the top. And of course he's back there, doing the pew pew thing at me, but the customer freaks and ran back out to the car. So you have to be super careful. But everything from line to throw bags to, different types of clips, carabiners, whatever you use in your training stuff, it gets expensive. But the reality is sometimes you can't expect a team to show up with all the right toys. Now, I'll give you guys an example of an argument that I have a lot. I don't like teaching a base level public safety course wet at all. I do not like it. I would rather teach full face and dry suit work and then approach whatever first level course you're taking completely encapsulated. Because we all preach through different agencies and everything else that any water is contaminated unless we know otherwise. That is a thing in the industry. It's a liability point. But as soon as I go out there and I begin to teach that, hey, we can do all this diving wet, immediately the guy who is not a diver, who controls the money, sits back and says, why do I need these thousands of dollars of dry suits? Then even if that person does come around, they're like, why do I need vulcanized rubber? That costs more. And it's another argument. But if you start from the beginning and you say, hey, we're gonna do full face and dry suit work first. That's our step one. Once we're done with that, we're gonna turn around. Everything we do from now on in training is fully encapsulated. And when you come out of the water, we're gonna scrub you down. We're gonna decon you. You're gonna have to stand there. It's gonna be warm, but we're gonna take care of you. Then you get to have that awkward conversation where one guy is over there with a brush and he's got to get underneath the other guy in a dry suit, right? And it's a funny day. But why would you not do that? All you did was build your ability to sell, but at the same time you created a safer diver. They're viewing it as every time they enter, there better be a good excuse for them not to be protected. Anyway, building your teaching kit to me is critical. It's something that you need to do to be prepared at the water. So if everything goes wrong, your teaching day doesn't end. So things like snap shackles, they get lost, people pocket them, whatever. I put 2 or 3 in my teaching kit. So when I show up, if, hey, we've been teaching these guys to use these. I'll run over to the truck, grab one real quick. We can continue on with what we're doing. Extra lines, ropes and stuff. So like a month ago, I was doing an ERD1 course. I called Daryl over there and I was like, hey man, I need extra rope for this class just in case. And absolutely, day one, we get to the water, we needed extra rope. So Stuff like that is stuff to look at. It's stuff to build. It's stuff that you and other pros you work with may work with the shop to develop a cachet to be able to teach. So that's where you, am I still on? Yeah. That's where you have shops versus pros. So with dive shops, you know, there may be a lot of access to have extra plates and wings or BCs or whatever you're using. You know, with the pro, do what makes sense with you. So mutual aid. This is one of the most critical ways for you as a dive instructor or as a dive shop to not only build your program, but to make some money. So we talked about the guys across town who were jerks, right? So we also discussed the fact that 99% of the time, no one actually knows what really happened to make that bad relationship. So you as a dive pro, you might be a member of Team X and Team Y hates you, but Team Y doesn't have to know that you're a member of Team X. You're now a dive pro, right? Well, now I'm going to go over to this team and I'm going to say, hey, I'd really love a meeting with whoever's in charge of the dive team. You know, I really want to sit down and talk about where you're at. And I don't want to step on any toes. I don't know who you're working with, but let's discuss something. So you got two things right there. You're really there to fix a relationship. But if you discover they have an issue with training, you just got a new team. So as soon as you get FaceTime with them, the smartest thing you can do is sit down and discuss where they're at, what the problem was that originally started the issue, how you can bring them together using a course. What I typically do, and this is me, so take it with a grain of salt. My favorite thing in the world is bring two teams together that hate each other and have them sit in a classroom together. I love that. They'll be on either side. They're all pissed off. Everybody's just mad. You know, and it's cool because you get to stand up there and teach, tell everybody to be quiet, and you can see the frustration. But the moment of fun comes when you go to the water. And the reason is because if Scott and I are the two team leaders, well, I'm the best, and Scott's going to think he's the best. And all my boys over here, they're great. Scott's suck. They're terrible. I hate these guys. Now he's going to do the same thing. So most of the time, the divers don't care. They genuinely don't care. They're there to get that card. They know they have to do this to move forward. They're there for education. So at that point, what I typically do if the bosses can't get along is they get to go sit with my business partner in the corner and watch, and I train their divers. Then afterwards, if they want to be certified like their divers, the two can pair up and do everything together as a team. And they can rely on each other as buddy, as tender and diver, etc. You know, they can do searches together, and there are two teams. We'll watch them. Sounds mean, but usually by the end of the day, they're shaking hands. They got a mutual aid agreement signed up, you know. They're over there talking about, oh, no, we got that gear you need. Don't worry about it. Next year, you get that on mutual or matching funds, and you know, we'll take care of you. Call us if you need it. We'll have a guy bring it out there. It's incredible. It's the most amazing thing that I've ever seen, but it will pull teams together like you would not believe. Well, all of a sudden, they're sharing ideas. They're sharing courses. They're getting together and saying, hey, man, I really want to do, you know, that Swiftwater program. And so they're contacting the college, and next thing you know, you've got 30 people signed up for a course. So it's a cool thing. It's super beneficial, but the thing you have to remember is you as the dive pro were the pivot point. You're the one that brought it together. So you have now become a positive resource for two teams that are seeking to spend money. So once again, there's a chance to have a profitability action in there. But at the same time, you've also done something really good because you dismissed a problem in your territory. So that last one. So I was privy to a discussion here recently about public safety diving standardization. So let's be really honest really quickly. If in this room we have 5 agencies, and let's just use that as an arbitrary number, and all 5 agencies have a public safety diver program of some type, how many of you think that if I take 5 instructors, 1 from each agency, and put them in a room, they can operate in the same fashion together and be effective if I give them a dive task? Probably not. Mainly because if we put the spotlight on them and we had agency people in front of them, they would all argue over which way was right. So the reality is this. Right now in the United States, there is zero standardization. It does not exist. It's something that's been argued for years. I'll be doubly honest with you. The effort has been made to put everybody in the room at one time and do something similar to the RSTC. It has been Not accepted in a very inappropriate fashion in my mind, but I'm nobody, so it doesn't matter. Now the other side of that is this is where things are really critical for you guys. Whoever you teach for, and we're not going to get into all that in here today, but you know your goal is to create safe divers, right? They got to go home. That's the most important thing. There's no body, there's no evidence, there's no vehicle, there's no anything down there that is worth one of your divers, right? The fact that anyone dives for that stuff to begin with is already more dangerous than the norm. Just is. So the reality is when you bring teams together, teams begin to learn how to operate with one another. They learn that, hey, we use line pulls that are similar to those guys. Let's talk about it. Let's make it one set. You know, hey, this is our time requirement for divers in the water. This is, do we run a 50%, a 90%? How do we do it? I like their way. Let's start doing it their way. All of a sudden, when Team A and Team B show up on scene, they work together like they're the same team. There's a good thing with that because all of a sudden everybody can function really well. Those photos at the bottom, the two on the right are a good example of a course that I was doing a long time ago. We brought 4 teams together in one location. We had about 48 divers there that day. And what we did was we would pull a diver from each team and make them pair up in a team of 4 to do skill sets in the water with us. Now, that was all recreational course stuff. We were doing a rescue class. But we beat the daylights out of them, but it started a mutual aid agreement that was 4 teams wide. And today, 3 of those teams have really good mutual aid agreements together, and the 4th one no longer exists. And then on the left there, one of our dive teams works Ironman every year in North Carolina. And we happen to have 3 dive teams and 2 fire departments just hanging out the night before the event started. And a local individual jumped off a dock in about 6 inches of water and landed on the concrete head first. And it was really cool because, and not the accident, but it was really cool that, you know, the dive teams operated like they were the same. The fire departments kicked in and did exactly what they were supposed to. And then we ended up working with UNC Healthcare because that was their helo that came in that night and pulled the guy out. But you know, after a while when teams begin to work together and function really, really well, when bad stuff happens, really good stuff comes out of it where otherwise it would be even worse. So anyway, you build value. That's the biggest thing. The better value you add, the more you give to a team or to dive professionals or divers in general that others don't. You're a resource they can't get rid of. You are a subject matter expert, right? In the corporate world, you are the person that can't be fired. We have to pay you more because we can't replace you, right? And you guys know that. If you have a lot of experience, if you're really good at public safety diving, and the guy across town literally got his card shipped in the mail because he did an online test the other day, that guy, even if he gets a class from you, they're going to come back to you. You know that. So that's the thing. Give value, just like anything else. So all this is stuff we've already hit on. But extras are critical. This is where your value comes from. You know, I can teach you, but I can also sell you gear. I can also service that gear. Hey, let's set up a contract for the next 5 years so that you don't even have to worry about getting bids. Now we're going to turn around and every year at X date, we're going to cycle through and take care of your regs, your cylinders, whatever, right? Why not? Teams do it quite often. It takes the headache off the chief at the time. Things typically get very easy at that point. Now, not everybody can do that. It just depends on if they can or can't and how they're set up. Outsourcing, like we said with instructors, it may also come down to, hey, I don't sell X, but there are ways to make sure that I sell this team what they need every time so my customer is once again taken care of. You guys that are shop owners can follow that one pretty well, and we don't have to go into that too much here. But funding and resources. The other thing is there's a lot of companies out there, and I'll use VideoRay as an example. Unmanned systems. VideoRay is very expensive, right? VideoRay will absolutely help you get grant money for dive teams. If you contact them, they will absolutely help you put together the entire plan, file it, and get your team that $130,000, $140,000 ROV with all the toys. So when they do the legwork for you, that's a good day, right? So there are ways to help out teams, to find dollars. And then lastly, any resource you have, not lastly, any resource you have is an added value. Does that make sense? So, we're almost done. So public safety work is not for everybody. You guys that have all been associated with teams, how many of you have seen divers come and go that lasted about 2.5 minutes? It happens, yeah? How many of you have seen that gung-ho person that shows up, I'm going to be the baddest public safety diver in the world, and then you put them in black water on the other end of a line and they are done for the day? It's not for everyone. You have to recognize that up front. And as a dive pro, one of your big critical factors is you need to tell your students that. Day one, when you're doing that first ERD1 class, you need to sit down and say, hey guys, let's be really honest on the front end. Until we go get wet, everything's still kind of up in the air, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You have to be compassionate about some things because you're also dealing with egos. But the reality is there's no place for a problem like that when everything goes south on you, right? So anyway, the other thing that's really critical to me is showing your avenues to success. So it's just like recreational diving. If you have an issue with a skill or somebody's just not remembering something or they're having a problem, but they're still okay, they can be a diver, show them an avenue towards how they can be really good, how they can fix their problem, how they can become better educated, whatever. Failure is never a thing you want to project on someone until it's done. Until you know we've reached an unsafe point. Because once again, that's where your profit point is now gone. So, we talked about staying current at the beginning. So things change, right? In the past year with ERDI alone, there's been quite a few changes. So a good example is... let's see, the tender swim test, I believe, is now done with a PFD on. So the idea is, by standard, tenders on shore are going to be wearing PFDs. And that's not just international training standard. 99% of the time, that's an OSHA standard, right? So why would a tender take off his PFD to go jump in the water and grab somebody? They're not. So that was an alteration that was made because it made sense, right? So innovation is something you have to watch for. It is absolutely critical moving forward, right? You have to see what's out there, what's new. Good example, unmanned systems, it's a thing. It is becoming more prevalent in the market. As things change and systems are more available, it'll change how dive teams operate. It just will. So, same thing. Figure out how to mess your students up, drive them through problems, develop greater knowledge, right? If you guys teach public safety, I know you've come up with some scenarios in the past that were off the wall and absolutely fun. That's the thing. The more you stump your students, the more you make training enjoyable, the more you focus on that teamwork objective to be successful. So like for me, one of my favorite things to do is if we do a swim test and they think they're done for the day, I put them all back in the water and I have them pass weight bags, right? There's no point in that. All it does is creates teamwork, right? They're going to be pissed off. They're going to be mad. But by the end of it, if you do this, literally, if you do skill sets, have them drag weight on the bottom, stuff like that, by the end of the day, they will be a well-oiled machine. The more tired they get, the more they work together, your dive teams will magically start working together. They will show it again when you go to train. So this is the other thing. New public safety divers. You as an instructor have to recognize who's going to be a quality diver versus who's there for the t-shirt and badge. I'm sure you guys have all seen that before. That is very common in this industry. There are different types of jobs on a team. There are physical fitness requirements. When it comes to having a dive team, there is a dedication factor. You have to be very clear on that, and then you also have to be very clear on we have a problem and we have to let someone go, or you're not the right type of person to teach. That's something to be cognizant of. So, my first big thing, be a public safety diver before you teach public safety divers. Does that make sense to everybody? Know before you do. Become competent before you go out there and you try to become solo. So tomorrow, I'll use Ben as an example. So, if Ben is a brand new dive instructor teaching public safety divers, it's a lot more comforting for him to get with Scott over here and teach a course together as a team teach, get his sea legs, so to speak, when it comes to public safety and instruction before he goes off and teaches all on his own. Now that's a personal preference. That's something you guys can do what's best for you, but figure it out. Be prepared for when you're teaching. Stay current on things that are going on in the industry. Make sure your divers are ready. Make sure they come home. That's the most important thing. So we hit the end of this right on the timeline. So has anybody got any questions before we